Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And we've got the official patch 9.1 release date. So I thought that it would be important to do a final round assessment of all of the specializations. Moving into patch 9.1, my thoughts on them and how I would rank them and order them and talk about them. So in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the melee DPS for a final round. I will have videos on ranged and videos on healers, and this is particularly aimed at performance. I've done a lot of videos also based on fun or what's some new exciting abilities that are coming to them and really catching my eye, but I wanted to make these for a concrete, this is what I'm expecting to be the meta versus the not the meta, and I've broken it down into that. So if you're meta, it means you're meta defining. You're gonna have a lot of options. You're gonna be the popular kid, right? Solid means that you mesh very well with the meta picks, but you're probably not gonna be able to play with anything outside of that. Limited means that you've really only got maybe one or two options in terms of PvP compositions. Not a lot of people are looking out for you when they're looking to try and construct their teams overall from sort of a pugging standpoint. Potential means that maybe you could be amazing, but you're playing a specialization that's historically not done so well. And then play at your own risk is basically a bad history of the spec, not too much really looking towards it being that awesome with this patch, and maybe you want to go into it and you'd be kind of playing it a little bit risky. But if you want to go for it, you can, and I'll talk about the pros and the cons of it if you decide to pick a specialization that falls into that boat. So for meta defining, right, I think it's important that we talk about the history of the meta for basically the last three expansions, and it's been all about burst damage, cooldown management, and tankiness. Usually the specializations that are the hardest or close to impossible to kill end up being meta defining, because if you can't die, you're not going to lose, and if there's other specializations that can die, those ones that are going to start to fall off are the ones that can't. So defense is a very important part. Having aggressive cooldowns that allow you to punch through is also an important component, because cooldown trading is so vital within the meta game of World of Warcraft, or at least of the current version of World of Warcraft. And I don't think that these core elements of the game are necessarily going to be changing. They have made some adjustments to specializations in terms of redistributing their damage into more of their sustained abilities, but not by so much that I think it's going to completely remove the mechanic where now the sustained damage is mattering more than the cooldown burst damage. So some specializations are likely still going to remain meta, but there may be opportunities for other ones to step into the meta category. So Arms Warrior, I think no doubt has been meta for all of the initial parts of Shadowlands. You've had the pick of the litter in terms of what you want to play with, and I don't think that this is going to be changing. Moving into patch 9.1, you still bring powerful offensive cooldowns with Avatar and Warbreaker. You're still bringing passive defense through defensive stance. You're still going to be highly durable. There are some things that could potentially be risky for you, such as all rogue specializations getting dismantled, and warriors can't use their die by the sword defensive cooldown if they don't have a weapon to die by their sword with. So being dismantled on a burst window makes you more of a target. So I think you're going to have a bit more difficulty with rogues, although you were probably getting the upper hand over rogues by a large margin for the initial part of it. So this might even just more or less be evening things out. But having the base kit that Arms Warrior has, the amount of sustained damage, cooldown pressure, innate tankiness to it, its utility, in a way that I'm making it sound like it's like crazy overpowered, but I really wish that all the specializations could get to a point where they're feeling the way that Arms Warrior ended up feeling in Shadowlands in terms of unpruning of abilities and how the kit works all together and the synergies of the spec. I think that it is a really well-made spec, and I think it's not really going to be changing too much in terms of it being meta or not meta. There are some very interesting new legendaries coming towards warriors, particularly for Kyrian, being able to have your Spear of Bastion last for 8 seconds. So imagine anyone trying to escape being pinned down for 8 seconds, then storm bolted or then death gripped back in. I think that this is going to provide a tremendous amount of synergy for melee DPS. I think this is going to allow melee DPS to be able to pin down the ranged attackers that are going to get stronger as haste increases, as the history of multiple expansions has shown. As haste goes up, the ranged DPS tend to get stronger along with it. So the ability to pin the caster DPS down is going to be very important, and Arms Warriors already a staple synergy component of that. So I don't think it's surprising that Arms Warrior is going to be meta. Assassination Rogue was struggling to get into meta for a while. We saw a little bit of Rogue Mage Paladin throughout 9.0 and 9.0.5, but it was not really finding its stride. But now in 9.1, with Feint having an increased duration, maneuverability getting buffs, you're getting mobility buffs, defense buffs, and you're getting Hemotoxin, which is a sharpened blade mechanic, on top of a powerful cooldown like Vendetta. Your kit is starting to look very similar to an Arms Warrior, and the ability to get now Dismantled to try and counteract the Arms Warriors. So I think Assassination Rogue is going to be likely meta defining. It's not really changing too much with the long history of the game, at least in multiple expansions. We've seen Mage Rogue doing well for a while. I could see Frostmage's Assassination Rogue variant doing very well, and that being more similar to how it played in Legion with Arcane Assassination, where you were just kind of dragging the fight out using poison daggers and ranging your opponents and then going in when you had stuns and doing damage. And then with Hemotoxin on top of that, I think it's going to enable the Rogue a lot of power in that sense. So there's going to be a bit of a clash, and you can already see that this is great, right? For 9.1, you want to have as many specs on meta defining, right? And they all have their little niche and they all have their selections. So I think 9.1 is going in a good direction. But now let's talk about Enhancement Shaman. This is a specialization that has been notoriously good within the realm of one composition, and that is the Arms Warrior Enhancement Shaman Healer. I don't think that that's going to change too much. Enhancement is almost quite literally getting nothing in terms of new stuff, at least anything that's really stood out to me. They decided to open up the lightning imprisonment totem. I've forgotten the name of it, but basically a totem down with a lightning shield that traps a target. They've decided to open that up to Enhancement Shaman as well as Elemental, but you've got a lot of other honor talents that are pretty high priority. It might be tough to take. And there's other classes that have better ways to pin a target. So your synergies are increasing, obviously, with the specializations that you're already playing with, being an Arms Warrior. Your healer options are going to open up as well. I think you'll be able to play with Discipline Priest, Holy Priest, Resto Druid, Mistweaver. I think you could almost play Turbo with any healer, except maybe Resto Shaman, and do well. So you'll have options in terms of that, but I don't think that it's going to be Enhancement Shamans, picking people from the dodgeball wall to have people on their team. They're probably going to be the one that's last picked. So for me, I think that it's probably a limited pick. It's not that I'm saying that it's bad, right? This doesn't mean that you're bad. It just means that if you're going to pick this specialization, you should already have your team planned out. It's not very flexible. So if you don't have friends pre-planned with that you're going to be running these strong compositions with, you're going to have a struggle time with it. I'm curious to see if it opens up any synergies with Farrell, having mortal wounds and having the double hybrid healing that's coming, or potentially Demon Hunter, although we didn't really see a lot of Enhancement Shaman Demon Hunter prior to this, and it already had the mortal wounds effect. But I'm not expecting it to really suddenly be Enhancement Shamans everywhere looking for their partners. It's still going to be kind of like, hey, Warrior, notice me, please. But you will be strong, right? You still got high hybrid healing, although that is being targeted a bit by all the increased mortal wounds effects. So maybe you actually will struggle. And Assassination Rogue particularly has kind of been the natural predator of the Enhancement Shaman for a long-standing time in the game. And with how much Assassination is getting, Enhance might struggle. So I think it is fair to say that Limited is where Enhancement Shaman is likely to belong. Farrell Druid, I think, is going to be a trailblazer. Jungle is already fantastic, and Jungle Cleave is getting even more fantastic moving into patch 9.1. So I think that Farrell is definitely going to be a meta-defining specialization, if not just within the realm of that composition, but possibly with other options. I'm thinking maybe even playing with dot classes like Shadow Priests, now that it has a Mortal Wounds effect. We've seen Shadow Priest Rogue for a long time. Now maybe Farrell Shadow Priest could get some opportunities, and that's me speaking a little bit loosely, but if you want to run a Farrell Druid, I've seen Farrell Druid Arms Warrior already doing really well in the current meta. I can only imagine that that's probably going to get better. Even things like Farrell Mage might even be more of an option now. We've seen that in tournaments pop up occasionally. Farrell's going to have more options, and it was already a strong contender, and it's getting even better, and all of the new additions to it look really fun and exciting. So for me, Farrell Druid is going to be a meta pick. And then Frost Death Knight. This is another specialization that's incredibly popular. This is a specialization that if you're a pug player and you're just playing by yourself in LFG all the time, I would highly recommend. You control the pace of the game. You can execute setups and windows to get kills, and you're going to be able to do that even even more so in patch 9.1 because you'll have Strangulate. So you can sort of be the playmaker, the lead of the team. Even if you're playing with no voice, you can control everything by gripping targets together, locking them down in AoE CC, following it up with massive burst damage. To me, Frost Death Knight would probably be one of my number one recommended specializations if you're a solo player who just pugs all the time. And I think that it is likely to be meta defining as well. Now with Heartstop Aura, I believe being changed now no longer to reduce cooldowns, but it limits your range. So you can prevent Warlocks from portaling if they overextend a little bit too far, or prevent mages from blinking as far. I think this is going to be just as disruptive. You might have been worried about that disappearing and maybe Frost Death Knight falling off as a result, but they got a new tool in its place and they're getting a tremendous amount of damage. And also, imagine a chill streak on an 8-second Spear of Bastion from an Arms Warrior. Nobody's getting away from that snowball fight. I feel like it would be a bit foolish to not say that I think Frost Death Knight is likely to be meta. It's going to fit in those niche categories, the double melee cleaves, clumping attackers together and then bursting them down like it always has. And then you usually want to pair up with something that can assist you with it, like the Spear of Bastion Warrior, so that when you get double range teams that try and run away, you'll be able to hold them together long enough to get your rotation off. But it's got burst damage. You might struggle a bit with the mortal wounds effects increasing here. So maybe playing with Mistweavers for high healing throughput is going to be important for you, or Resto Druids who just play in the back line and keep hots up. This one thing I would be a bit worried for them. Maybe I should order these more in terms of like what I think in terms of strength going left to right. So strongest being left and then move to the right. We'll do that at the end of the video. But I do think it'll still be meta, right? And it's already one of the most popular specs. I think, again, there's a reason for that because you can be that playmaking spec and it's so pug friendly. In terms of if you're an awesome individual player, you'll be able to carry a lot of situations on it. Now, Fury Warrior, this is the one that they made the first change to right away, and it was like blown away. Like, oh man, you're giving mortal wounds to Fury. That's what every warrior has said, that this spec, if it had mortal wounds, it would compete with arms. I can't even. I'm trying to like put on my hand like how many warriors I've seen that have said that about Fury. They didn't really do anything else to it though. It's just you're getting mortal wounds. It lasts 5 seconds on your rampage. It could be really good. It has a lot of potential, but with the long-standing history of the Fury Warrior, in terms of my final assessment here for picking a main or picking an alt or picking something that you want to play in terms of performance, in terms of pugging, I think that there's likely still going to be a bit of a bias, right? And this is mostly because arms is so good. When you go into LFG and someone says, I'm looking for a warrior, and they're like, you're not arms? I think it's likely going to be the first reaction. So you're going to have to kind of break through some walls, break through some bias towards Fury, if it even ends up being good at the end of the day to try it. It's still the double dual-wielding two-handed melee chopping spec. It's had a couple of patches where it's done really well, like Worlds of Janna with Siegebreaker, but it often tends up being just this kind of one-shot spec or this sustain healing spec, and I don't see it having either of those necessarily right now. It's basically relying on this new mortal wounds effect to provide its place, and it's then basically equally competing with Assassination's mortal wounds and all of its kit, and Arms Warrior and all of its kit, and Farrell Druid now and all of its kit, and maybe even Demon Hunter and all of its kit. So because the kits are becoming very homogenized in a sense, right? There's a mortal wounds for everybody. You're then competing with how much damage do you do? How much utility do you have? It's probably doing comparable damage to all those specs. It's got about the same utility as Arms Warrior, so it's like a direct competitor with Arms Warrior. Maybe we see Fury Warrior Death Knight instead. It's kind of a wait and see for me on that. If you're diehard Fury Warrior, I think this is the patch to try it. But if you're a warrior who's arms, thinking like, should I reroll Fury? Is it going to really be better? It's probably going to be equal in my estimation. Or maybe slightly worse. And again, dealing with that bias, if you don't want to worry about dealing with that bias because the history of the spec, might be better to avoid it. But I don't want to talk you out of it completely because this is the first time in a long time that Fury's had something hype going for it, right? So it has potential, and I wouldn't say that it's kind of play at your own risk. It's just you're gonna have a little bit of a struggle proving whether or not it's gonna deserve its position. Now, Havoc Demon Hunter. This is a tough one for me because, I mean, in 9.0 and 9.0.5, we've already seen it have some flexibility. It's played with Death Knights to some success on the ladder. It's played with a Fire Mage. It's been quite flexible, and it's got a lot of buffs. It's got buffs to its sustain damage. It's got buffs to its defense. It's got buffs to its honor talents. Just all around buffs, right? And it was already in a position where it was playing with some wildly different specializations that it has really in the past. So is it going to be meta defining? This is like the hardest one for me, because in the back line, it used to kind of just be the backup, right? It was just the backup singer to the warriors, and every warrior was like, yeah, you're a good backup singer, get on stage with me. But it was never kind of the lead singer where it controlled every melee that it played with. So I'm a bit curious to see how it plays out. It could do incredibly well with Frost Death Knights, right? Doing a grip into a stun into a strangulate. That's a long time to be silenced while you've got Illidan running at you full speed, going for a hunt. So, I mean, I can easily see it being powerful. So it's a question of whether or not is it meta or is it just solid, right? Is it a backup singer or is it a lead singer? Maybe it is time. Maybe it is time for Demon Hunter to be considered a lead singer. This is the hardest one, I think, out of all of them to really decide here. You've got really good synergies with pretty much anything in the game now. Moving into patch 9.1, your Mortal Wounds effect is easier to maintain on your Blade Dance rather than your Fell Rush. Sustain damage buffs, defense buffs. The only kind of risk that you'll have is that your Darkness is now no longer 70% in PvP. It's 50% baseline, but it's 50% without needing any talents. So you can open up to have more honor talents. And they've buffed Demonic Origins so that your Metamorphosis lasts longer on a shorter cooldown by about 5 seconds. So getting more Metamorphosis. So I think that it's time. I think that the spec that literally has Metamorphosis, I put it on meta. Kind of confidently put it on meta moving into this patch. It'll be interesting to see. It's always nice and fun to do these. I tried to wait a little bit longer this time to do it based on performance, because in the past I've done it based on performance and they do some last minute change. I don't know if they watched the video or a bunch of videos and they're like, oh no, and then tried to change something last minute. So this one I've left a little bit later than normal to see if my prediction is going to be right. But I would imagine that Demon Hunter can't be doing worse. It would only be doing better with everything that it's getting. So I think it's time. Demon Hunter is gonna rise into this top competitive category. And you can see already that I consider a lot of specs kind of meta defining or having strong positions and options and comps and for 9.1. Now Outlaw Rogue, to me, the direction it seems like they're trying to go with the specialization is that you're some sort of tanky pirate rogue. Not sure how that's going to work out. They basically stole all of your utility, tricks of the trade, dismantle, and gave it to the other rogue specs. So anything that you did have that was unique to you is now available to all the rogues. And I haven't seen anything that's really surprising. So it's tough for me to say that it has potential. I think that it's probably a play at your own risk. I don't know if they want Outlaw Rogue to be the melee cleave rogue spec by making it more durable, but are you really going to be more durable than a warrior? Assassination got the same types of durability buffs in terms of feint. Are you going to be more durable than a Farrell Druid with regrowth and infinite mobility and auto frenzy regen? Are you going to be more tanky than a Demon Hunter and Metamorphosis? Maybe you're more tanky than a Frosty K, but you don't have Chains of Ice to spam and kite your enemies. You're just kind of naked. You just kind of blank. I don't. There's nothing that's standing out to me on Outlaw Rogue other than the same story, which is a reduced cooldown on blind, that makes me think that it's going to have the potential. And again, you're competing with two other rogue specs. You're competing with Assassination, just the top dog for sustained damage and constant healer pressure, or Subtlety, the master of setup, and usually the number one go-to for the mages that want to play Mage Rogue. Where do you fit, right? The only identity I could see that's left is that you're some sort of melee brawler Outlaw Rogue, but there's already so many other melee brawlers like Arms Warriors, Frosty Ks, Demon Hunters, Enhances that really you want to try and contend with that many different specs? I think it's going to be a play at your own risk. If you want to be a YOLO pirate, go ahead. I think you're going to have a hard time pugging, probably a hard time in solo PvP. This is, again, more of a competitive 3v3 list, but I would say play at your own risk for Outlaw. Now, Rhett Paladin, It's getting a little bit of nerfs on its procced wings, but it's getting AoE Judgment Dispel. So you can dispel one magic, disease, or poison effect when you judge a target. That's absolutely insane to me, especially the synergies with the comps that it was already powerful in, like Warrior Rhett Paladin. So being able to dispel and stay on your target, and then again pinning a target in 8 seconds, Spear of Bastion. Maybe you can even open up some options to play with Farrell Druids now that they have Mortal Wounds. Run the double hybrid. Rhett Paladin is a #1 pug spec. Maybe it is the #1 pug spec. I said Frosty K was a really good pug spec, but I think Rhett Paladin is probably the #1 pug spec because you can end a game with burst damage and Hammer of Justice. You can also prevent a game from ending with Word of Glory and all the utility that's on the Rhett Paladin. This is a hard carry specialization when it comes to the ladder. You start to struggle more in the highest level of tournament play due to the weaknesses of Rhett, but on ladder you will be an absolute monster. So if you're not looking towards tournaments and you're just a ladder grinder, I think Rhett Paladin is probably, I would have to say it's the #1 spec in regards to that as a solo pug player or just a ladder player in general. And I don't think that's changing. And I think getting this AoE dispel is opening up options for you to be absolutely nutty. I think likely the same composition is still going to be powerful. The Warrior Rhett. I'm curious to see if Farrell or even Death Knight with Rhett becomes an option, because I mean I remember Death Knight Rhett in the old days where you'd strangulate Hodge, a healer, and just one tap them. You had the Vanguard smile whenever the Shaman was in a Hammer of Justice in that situation. So maybe you have a couple more options. I don't think it's going anywhere other than just remaining where it was in terms of a meta spec. Now, Subtlety Rogue, this is one that, again, is really strong in setup comps. I can still see Rogue Mage Priest, especially with Holy Priest, being powerful because you have the ability to crowd control 3 targets at the same time pretty effortlessly. And then you just follow up with burst damage, and you can execute those 3-2-1 setup goes. And that's always been meta. You're still going to be quite durable. I think the Holy Priests are buffs coming to Holy Priests are going to still allow you to have some longevity. But you're kind of limited, right? You're only really playing that. You're not doing too much. I think Assassination will be the one that's more flexible, playing with Shadow Priest or playing with other specs other than just Mage. And because you're limited only to the Mage, this again isn't that I think Subtlety will be a bad spec. It's just not flexible. But within the realm of Rogue Mage, you're going to be #1. Maybe not #1. Assassination might still be #1. So maybe we do just stay limited. I think you really need to play the triple crowd control setup comps like the Holy Priest, Fire Mage, and then Subtlety Rogue. That might be the last standing bastion for those specializations, but that comp could absolutely be a monster. Subtlety Rogue, it's always the spec where if it's strong, it one-shots you and it feels unfair, and then it usually gets nerfed into the ground, and then everybody forgets about it, and people play Assassination and just pokey, stabby their way up the ladder. And that's kind of repeated quite a lot. So I think Subtlety is more or less limited. Now, Survival Hunter. Survival Hunter got damage buffs, but the main problem for Survival Hunter is similar to Fury, where when you're going into LFG or you're building your team and you're just thinking about the Survival Hunter is, why aren't you Beast Mastery? You can be ranged to do more damage. You have the same weakness of your pet dying, and it's just as disruptive and as annoying, if not even more difficult to deal with, because as a Beastmaster Hunter, you can run away and try and res your pet, but as a Hunter, you're going to lose all of your damage and not be in a great position to try and res your pet if it dies. So you're almost at higher risk of the weaknesses of the Hunter class than the Beastmastery variant. Beastmastery's damage is easier to pull off. It's safer to pull off. It's more unpreventable. It's tough for me to say Survival Hunter is going to be in a great place. It's also a niche spec that I don't think a ton of people play with. Maybe I'm wrong. There's going to be a million Survival Hunters in my comments saying, what? We all play Survival. But it seems like it's always been kind of a niche spec. And then if Beast Mastery is not performing well or Marksman is not performing well, Survival has just filled the shoes of the Hunter class. But Beast Mastery is in a great position, an even better position in 9.1. So for me, do we want to say... I think that it is solid. I've seen it played in jungle, and it's solid. It's just a question of that's it, right? Like, why don't you play BM? So maybe we say limited. You can play the jungle cleave composition with it. It's like a secondary backup. But aside from that, I don't see you having a huge amount of options. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that's popping in my head. Like, why wouldn't you play Rhett BM if you're going to try with a Rhett? Death Knight Hunter has just not been a thing for a long time. It's tough for me. I would say it's limited. Now, Unholy Death Knight, This is another one that hasn't had a good rap. It's had a couple of compositions. The one composition that I think maybe you might not even be aware of that I've seen is the Shadow Priest Unholy Death Knight Resto Shaman, and this was a rank 1 viable comp in Battle for Azeroth, and I've seen it played quite competitively in Shadowlands, but really only by 1 or 2 teams. And again, it's probably a case of, why are we playing together? Shadow Priest, DK, Resto Shaman. We have so many other better options than this. We'll play it because we like it, and this is our comp kind of deal. So it's kind of tough, but it has been able to work. You're getting survivability buffs. You're getting Strangulate returned. And really, for me, Unholy Death Knight's viability is going to be determined whether or not the meta is only about cooldowns, right? And I think Shadowlands, I've had it explained in other videos where it's all about the highs. It's all about the cooldown timings when your damage is at its highest. And then outside of that, we're kind of just waiting to get back to that high again before we can end the game. And if it's at that much of an extreme, Unholy is at its weakest, because Unholy is all just about building sustained pressure over time, maintaining uptime, and generating pressure. But if that isn't the playstyle for quite literally anything in the game, Unholy Death Knight's just not going to exist. So Unholy is getting sustained buffs, survivability buffs. It could synergize very well with Demon Hunter, right? With its sustained buffs, maybe even Farrell Druid with its sustained buffs, with Arms Warrior. But when it comes to burst damage, when it comes to those peaks, Frost Death Knight always outperforms it in the ability to group targets together. So I feel like it's going to be limited. It's somewhere between potential and limited, right? I think maybe even potential might be a more safe option to put it. And it's really going to be determined by the meta that I'm not sure is going to change. If the honor talents could create more opportunities before dampening, because there's more healing reduction effects that are the same. It's the same thing as dampening. It's like putting a class. Farrell now starts at 25% dampening because it has 25% mortal wounds. So those comps could have more opportunities to win before dampening. But if it's still just about lining up that big Templar's Verdict hit, or big Templar or Divine Toll hit, or big Hunt hit, and then nothing outside of that is going to be able to allow you to win the game, Unholy will struggle. And I haven't seen anything to say that it's not going to be like that. And I think that Unholy might struggle with all the other mortal wounds effects and warriors chopping them down. So a bit tough. I would say that it has potential, though, and it has had a couple of comps work well with it. So this could be the time to try it out and see how it goes. And just really pay attention to the meta. And if you want to follow along with any updates like that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll keep you up to date with that. Now, Windwalker is played with Windwalker Death Knight. I've seen a couple Windwalker Enhancement Shamans. It's kind of been the melee cleave. And then in tournaments, particularly the Windwalker Mage, right? This one has won a ton of tournaments. And I think that this is the composition that's really up for debate. Is this composition going to be dethroned? Is this no longer going to be kind of the tournament winning meta defining composition? I think with the ability to pin targets down more, with things like the Spirit Bastion, the Strangulates, the Mortal Wounds effects, the extra magic dispels, the mobility buffs to these classes to stay on. Because the main thing with the Mage Windwalker was that you just couldn't touch them. If they decided to say nope, they were kind of just like, the big brother with the little brother trying to fight, and you're just holding their head and no one can get to you, and they're just sitting there like that. That was Windwalker Mage in PvP, just sitting here, just like, yeah, you can't touch me. I think that you might be able to touch them more than you would in the past, right? And Holy Paladin might not be in the best position in terms of mana. So if you can actually attack them and run the Paladin out of mana, that comp likely could struggle as a result. So I think for me, I would say that Windwalker is solid. It's still going to work really well with the Death Knights, gripping things together, stunning them, and blasting them down. I'm just worried about the meta, the Fire Mage Windwalker Paladin not being the meta to where you're controlling everything. So for me, I think Windwalker is solid. I think it may struggle with getting pinned down in an 8-second spear, or a hemotoxin kidney shot, or now Mortal Wounds Jungle Cleave running at them, or even Windwalker or Death Knight Warriors cutting them down, Demon Hunter Death Knights preventing them from moving around or staying on target, or the Rhett Paladin Warriors chopping them out in one fell swoop. So where their durability is lacking, the mobility made up for it, but now there's a lot of mechanics to get around that mobility. So I'd say that they're going to be solid still. The synergies that it's had throughout its history of grouping targets together and AoEing them down is not going anywhere. Its high burst damage is still there, which is important. But I would say that maybe it's slightly worse. So now just to organize these in terms of like their overall power, I think that jungle is probably going to be one of the best comps in the game. The warrior comps probably second. Rhett Paladin comps, the assassination rogue comps, the frost death knight, and the demon hunter probably last place. And then this is probably more accurate in terms of their strengths. So Farrell, Warrior, Rhett, Asa, Frost, Demon Hunter, Windwalker, Enhanced, Subtlety, Survival, Unholy, Fury, and Outlaw. And this is my final update for 9.1 in terms of my prediction for what's going to be meta. We talked about the strategies that have been employed so far, my expectations for them moving forward. Now it's just a matter of seeing whether or not I'm right or if I'm totally off base here. With this one, I've tried my best to wait so that there isn't any update that sneaks in between this video, but if it does, I'll get that right to you. But again, there's like a week, I think, until it comes out, or a little bit more than a week. So I think that it would be unlikely. We'll get to see how it progresses. Either way, I'm very excited for patch 9.1. I think introducing more mortal wound effects to try and create opportunities to win the game prior to dampening is a good move. There's a lot of interesting new sort of zone denial talents to check out as well that create some more exciting moments in the game that have really never been in the game before. Like we've got mages constructing walls, warlocks teleporting enemy attackers around. There's going to be some very interesting gameplay mechanics that have never been done in World of Warcraft that I'm curious to try out with 9.1. So again, this is for performance, but there is still a lot of other stuff to check out as well. Other than that, if you like the video, leave it with a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts on specializations. If you think I'm totally off base with this, let me know. And then we'll see you in the next video. I'm going to be doing ranged. I'm going to be doing healers. And if you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed. It's absolutely free. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.